This happened when I was 14. For a little bit of background, this takes place at my grandparents' house. They live in Virginia, in a forest by a large river, in a loose community. There are about 3 roads in the community, one of which has about 15 houses, a short road that leads to some wetlands that smell terrible, and then there's a long road that leads down to the river that has 3 large houses. That's the road that my grandmother lives on. Her house is by the water. On the other side of the house, across the gravel road, is her garage. The garage is about 100 to 200 feet back from the road and looks more like a large house rather than a garage. It is nestled against the tree line of the forest. When this happened, I was with my siblings along with my cousins. So it was dark out, and someone had the amazing idea of playing manhunt. The boundaries were set to the land which my grandparents own, which included the garage. One of my cousins and I decided it would be best to stick together so we could split up if somebody found us. We crawled into some bushes by the road and waited. Not long after we settled down, I started to get a feeling. It was very soft at first, just a tugging sensation in the back of my mind. Something was off. I slowly started to pay more and more attention to the noises around me. Everything sounded normal. By normal, I mean the cicadas were buzzing so loudly I could hear anything else. Still, there was the feeling that I needed to move. At this point, I suggested we were too close to the road and maybe we should change spots. We crawled out from the bushes and moved across the gravel road, making a wide arc around the garage just to prevent the motion lights from going off and showing my sister, who was hunting us, where we were. When I stepped out into the field that the garage is on the other side of, I was aware of something. I couldn't tell what it was, but I had something's attention. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, but more like knowing that something was out there, and it knew I was here, but it didn't know where I was exactly yet. I downplayed it and thought it might have just been my brother, as he likes to sneak up on people. Besides, me and my cousin often get feelings that things are watching us, and if I brought this up, she would only freak out. So, my cousin and I head for the tree line next to the garage. Now, the ground behind the tree line slopes down suddenly, at what I would say is a steep angle, for about 3 feet before flattening out. Kinda like if you Google forest roads and look at how just off the sides of the ground slopes down suddenly. We laid on our stomachs and watched the road from our new hiding spot, just inside the forest. I noticed after a minute that things were quieter. I looked back for a second and just kinda was listening to my gut for a minute. My gut was practically screaming at me to get up and run. I knew that something was watching me. I decided to just lay perfectly still and observe my surroundings closely. It was dark, and I could only see the barn and the field. I had no chance of seeing anything in the forest due to the leaves blocking most of the moonlight. It seemed very quiet and very wrong. I noticed the cicadas had stopped buzzing, and I couldn't even hear the crickets. It got so quiet that I heard ringing in my ears, and the only noises I could hear was the light crunching of leaves under my cousin's stomach as she breathed. By this point, she was looking around, clearly frightened. When I slowly looked up at her, I could tell she had the same feeling of dread, the feeling that something was waiting, and it was about to do something. When she opened her mouth to say something, we both heard a sudden crackling noise behind us, and both of us decided we did not want to die. I have never ran faster in my life. The motion lights from the garage turned on, and I could see the shadows of something behind us. We ran to where our grandparents' driveway starts, as it was much brighter. I looked back to see if my cousin was behind me, and I almost tripped over my own feet. I could only see its silhouette. It was, at my guess, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its arms were too long, and its chest was thicker than it should be. Its head was human, but also not human. The shape of it was all wrong. It had 2 yellow eyes that locked onto my frozen figure. It turned its head slightly and watched me while I stared at it. My cousin was not going to let me stand there and die, so she started pulling me back to the house, screaming at me. The thing across the street then turned its head to the side, as if watching for a car to come down the gravel road. It looked like its face had skin, but not the area around its lips or teeth. Think of anywhere that you could bite your own cheek or lips, and the skin and flesh around there was just gone. Its teeth were something else. One of the things that was wrong with it was its face was simply too big. Its teeth were huge, and they stuck out a bit from its face. I got the feeling it was showing me this to taunt me, as if to say, "Want to stick around and find out more?" No, I did not, and after figuring out the whole big sharp teeth thing, I was happy to run to the porch and hide with my cousin. We hid there for half an hour. We only came out after somebody suggested that maybe we hid across the street, and I was not okay with any of my family members possibly running into that thing again. While my cousin and I were hiding, we talked about how no one would believe us, and how if somebody did believe us, then it would be our grandmother, who would probably then try and find it. Both of us agreed just not to tell our family. When it's dark at my grandma's house, my cousin no longer goes outside and stays in. I don't stray far from the light of the house and don't go near any bushes. When I'm inside, I make sure all the windows are shut and locked. If I'm feeling brave, I'll sit at the end of the pier with my feet in the water, looking back at the house, never with my back to the shore. While I'm outside, and sometimes when I stand near windows with the curtains and shades open, I get the feeling it's watching me in the dark, wherever it lurks. I'm curious as to what this was. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a skinwalker, because Virginia isn't exactly close to any Navajo reservations. But at the same time, I don't exactly know. So, I've always wanted to share this story. I've only told a few people, just because I knew nobody would probably believe me. And to be honest, it took a few years for me to come to terms with what I saw. But I still stand by it. When I was 19, I'm 31 now, I lost my job at a Coca-Cola plant in New Mexico. Born and lived till I was 24. My older brother asked if I would be interested in working at the mines in Arizona. He had been there for a month already with a friend, and they lived in an RV park in Clifton, Arizona, and mine wasn't far out from where they lived. I lived at the chance to get out and get out of my boring town, and in about 3 weeks, I had myself a job. I would stay with my brother and his friend in the RV on weekends, and we would drive back to visit family, etc. The RV park we stayed at was actually pretty interesting. On one side, there was like a wall where on the bottom was like a gorge, where it would venture off into streams through the town, and on the other, a huge cliff. At night, the way the moon hit it looked like something out of a painting. The courtyard was huge, all the RVs wrapped around it. Where we were parked to get to the showers and rec room was just a straight 200 feet walk, majority through the big courtyard. The thing that did suck there was the javelinas. Sometimes after taking a shower, you would have to haul your butt back to the RV, or wait in the rec room for them to leave outside. They would sometimes be wandering in the park. I remember one time my brother and friend thought it would be funny to chase a javelina family off with bats. It was pretty hilarious, until they got chased back. So, one night after dinner, I decided to go outside and listen to some music. I remember we had a picnic-type bench that faced towards the courtyard. I'm sitting there with my headphones in, bumping some music, when I saw something come into the courtyard. I thought it was a cat at first, moved like one, but the body was longer. Then I saw the longer ears and thought maybe it's a coyote or a dog. I'm watching it kind of move through the area, but it was already dark, so I couldn't see it perfectly. My headphones are still blaring at this point. I decide to get up off the bench and get its attention. I do that thing where you click your mouth to get a dog's attention, and I see the ears go up when it heard me. I'm kind of standing by the RV door and the table, and I see the thing start to come towards me, but I see it's crouching but moving quickly. I'll never forget that. There I am smacking my tongue at it like an idiot, and this thing is moving like a snake. It got about maybe 80 feet, before all of a sudden, it must have heard something in the distance because it stopped, and its head kind of cocked, and decided to run off towards the cliff. Here's the thing I'll never ever forget. When it ran off, it stood up. It looked like a very skinny boy had been wearing a fur coat when it ran, because the skin was dangling, but still attached to its head. It was so fast and strange, I just sort of stood there, confused. I really had to just stand there and let my brain process, or try to process what I saw. I told my brother and his friend. Of course, they didn't believe me. My brother said it's probably somebody's dog, but that still didn't explain the boy figure. I told my mother, and she's seen some crazy stuff in her time, but nothing like what I told her. I never saw anything like that at the RV park again. Still saw the javelinas wandering about, but that was it. I worked for another few weeks, but got laid off and went back to see my parents. I honestly don't know too much about skinwalkers, but I know I saw something that wasn't in the realm of normal. I was out camping with some friends just a couple of months ago, and I had an extremely bizarre and somewhat terrifying encounter that I cannot explain. We decided to go and camp near Bullfrog Marina, Lake Powell, Utah, and since the primitive campground was closed due to COVID, we decided to find a camp spot on a nearby road. We spent the first night in an hallucinogenic-fueled state, with the full moon shining above us. It was truly an amazing spiritual experience. The next day, we went down to the beach at Bullfrog Marina and spent the day in the sun, and when we got back to the camp, most of my friends decided to take a nap. My brother and I knew that if we took a nap, that we may as well call it a night. So, we chose to go explore the gully and the dry riverbed below our camp. It was beautiful, a very beautiful area. We actually found a bullfrog hopping around and what we determined to be lemur footprints. It was after dusk at this point and was starting to get pretty dark. I told my brother that I wanted to check out this little canyon near the riverbed before we went back to camp. He agreed, so we made our way into the canyon. It was actually pretty dark in the canyon, and I only had a small flashlight with me. I was walking in front, and my brother behind me. I figured that it was a fairly small canyon, and I assumed that the rock wall that I was looking at near the back of the canyon was the end. But as I thought we were nearing the end, I noticed that the canyon actually curved back more to the right. As I saw that it went back further than I speculated, I remembered that it is not uncommon for there to be bobcats and cougars in this area. I started feeling a little uneasy at the thought of it being a potential den for a predator, when a breeze blew into the canyon and a bush near me moved as a result of the wind. "Oh shit," I said, and my brother responded with, "What?" Seeing that I was startled. "Oh, it was just a bush," I replied, as I made my way around the bush and peered in the back of the canyon. I saw something walking toward me at a fairly fast pace. "Oh my, go!" I hollered at my brother, and we ran back up the embankment in the canyon to higher ground. What did you see?" he asked me, as I was shining my light down near the bush that I was near earlier. "I saw something darting toward me." "That was terrifying," I replied. "What did it look like?" he asked. "It looked humanoid, bony, and standing on two legs," I said. He felt uneasy too at this point. "I couldn't see too well. It is so dark in here. Maybe it was my imagine..." Right as I said that, my light shined down on two eyes behind the bush, swaying as if it was trying to get a better look at us through the bush. "We need to go," I yelled, and we took off out of the canyon. We made it back to the riverbed and paused for a moment. I looked back to see if whatever I saw was following us. We saw nothing at this point, and we kept moving back toward our camp. Part of me wanted to go back for a better look, because I've always wanted to experience something supernatural, if that is what this was. But the other part of me wanted to get out of there. Eventually, we made it back to the camp, and our friends were still sleeping. We ate a little food, and once we winded down a little bit, we decided it was best to go to bed. When we woke up the next day, as we're getting ready to head home, I told my friends what had happened, and they were freaked out hearing my story. One of my friends told me that he woke up to the sounds of somebody walking around his tent in the middle of the night. He said he thought it was one of us, but hearing that made him think it could have been someone or something else. I still do not know what I saw that night, but the thought of it still frightens me to this day. Most of my family lives out on the reservation, but I moved states away many years ago to get out of that hellhole. I've since started a new job and a new life in other places. I much prefer the greenery of southern Oregon than I do the deserts of New Mexico and Arizona. I still make trips back to see my family every so often, and unfortunately, as much as I don't want to believe it to be true, we do have our encounters with dark spirits. Just this last time I was there, my brother believes he was followed home by what he believes what you would call a skinwalker. We have a name for them, and our culture does, but I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to bring attention to it. He was coming back from a friend's house, and he said he made eye contact with this strange-looking person covered in animal skins walking alongside the road in the middle of the night. It wasn't pitch black yet, but it was dusk, bright enough to where he could still see the person's face. He drove by, and they made complete eye contact, and he told me he felt like this person attached itself to him. I blew him off and didn't really know what he meant. I thought he was just huffing and puffing. He said he could feel this person's energy attached to him and his vehicle, and then the person started sprinting after his truck. He only drove faster, but then when he looked back up in his rearview mirror, the person was gone. He kept driving, but then only a few minutes later, noticed this abnormally large coyote running alongside his truck about 100 feet or so out in the desert, staying parallel with him. It looked very mangy and had very unnatural sunken-in eyes. He just got bad feelings from this thing and decided to lead it astray instead of leading it directly back to the house. He pulled through some different areas and neighborhoods and took a very long way home. He lost track of it at some point, but he's still sure that it's watching him somewhere. Sometimes he used to always think the whole Skinwalker jargon was just a bunch of crap, but the more time I spent with my family out here, the more I realized there is a lot more truth to it than I would like to accept. You can be even trying your best to stay out of it, but that still doesn't guarantee you safety. Luckily, we have medicine men in our family who can pray and protect over us, but these things still, I feel like they have too much power. I don't feel like medicine men is enough to protect us. This is one of the reasons that I feel so much safer having moved to Oregon and far away. I know Southern Oregon isn't exactly a safe zone per se, but much better than being at ground zero, where these things thrive and feed off the torment of the weak. I know for a fact that skinwalkers are real, or if they are not skinwalkers, they are something. A month ago, in June, I was driving through the reservation with a friend of mine when we stopped to pull over to go pee outside. I decided to have a quick cigarette real quick, while my friend had to drain the pipes. We felt a weird energy as soon as we got out of the car. There were no other cars around in the visible vicinity. Out here, you can see other cars coming for a long ways away, just because of how flat it is. We did, however, have a wonderful view of the mesas and the red desert that spanned forever. We're not from around the Navajo reservation, but we've had many friends from the area, so we're familiar with the terrain. As I was saying, the energy, it felt very off. My friend's pissing in the one sagebush, and I'm puffing away on my cigarette, when off in the desert, we see this tall, skinny black figure with what looks to be a skull-type head stand up from behind a large bush and begin walking towards us slowly. I start saying to my friend, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" And I kid you not, midstream, he starts freaking out and pointing, saying, "What is that thing? Why is it coming towards us? We need to get out of here." The best I can describe to you is the body reminded me something like Slender Man or something. Very tall, very lanky, but obviously not 13 feet tall or anything creepypasta or unrealistic looking. Probably more 7 to 8 feet tall, if I had to guess. Not too much taller than I. It reminded me whatever it was in was long tattered black robes or something. They were very dirty. Again, it was very slender. The head looked to be that of a goat skull or something weird. It was a skull though, I can tell you that. And from the distance it was away from us, it was as clear as day that it was a skull that had some sort of horns on it, like possibly a goat skull, and it was walking on 2 legs toward us, very slowly, never breaking stride or eye contact. Although, even the way it moved seemed incredibly weird. It didn't bob up and down like a person normally does when they take a stride. It kind of glided. Even though there were points where there should have been visible legs, it was just a long black tattered rope from what I can tell, and it stayed unmoving. But again, it was very slow and steadily moving towards us. Who knows why or what it was? Since my friend and I are familiar with the area, we've had friends who are native to these parts and have their own stories to tell. Stories that I've always written off, but I've had some stories from friends that were terrifying in a way. Part of the reason I've always wanted to avoid coming to the reservation. Even though in my own mind, I wanted to deny it as much as I possibly could. I guess the question I should be asking is, were we targeted for a reason? Could it have just been a mere coincidence that we were at the wrong place at the wrong time? My friend and I jumped back into the car and got out of there. I don't recall ever being so afraid in my life, and I'm not one to buy into the whole creepypasta BS. I would like to think that it was somebody in a costume trying to spook us, but who would be out there in the middle of the desert on a 110-degree day in full costume? It doesn't make any sense. We were only out there for maybe 2 minutes, if even that, before we saw this thing. We were laughing and joking, making noise, but I didn't think we were that loud. But I'm guessing that maybe this thing had heard us. Here's the story. Basically, I live in Westmoreland County of Pennsylvania. For a while, actually, there's been strange occurrences around, but recently, the most real and convincing occurrence that there is a cryptid. Basically, my girlfriend vacationed at a place where there was known to be Seneca tribes, so I don't know if she brought back something. Anyway, she's over tonight, and I live with another friend, FYI. Anyway, we take our dog out, and our motion lights aren't triggered, when all of a sudden, there's a hiss right next to us, and the bushes shake, and we rush the dog in, as we have no idea what it could be, as this area is prone to raccoons and deer and some coyotes. Me and my friend go outside with weapons and flashlights, as we have a dog, and is partially blind and has a bad leg, so we can't risk him getting attacked. Along with that, there's a guy in our rather wooded community that has a brain issue and tends to wander at night. So with that in mind, we go outside and we hear a bird call. Remind you, it's 1 a.m. We hear this bird call non-stop. In my mind, I'm thinking I'm being lured by a skinwalker or the crazy dude, so we go inside and look out our patio window only to see a deer at our fence line. The deer's back legs looked mangled. I kid you not. It actually looked like it's walking with its back legs turned backwards. There's a deer that roams back there that has a broken leg, but only one, and he's always with the family. Anyway, we see this deer, but when it first looks at us with the flashlight on its eyes, they are green. It puts its head down and stares at us, and we shine the light around and back on it, and its eyes are now red. When they go back to green, at that point, I'm convinced this is a skinwalker. It turns and is walking around. It isn't listening to me screaming to leave, so I call it a Navajo witch. I don't know why I didn't know what to get its attention, but I kid you not, it turned its head and stuck its neck up so freakishly long and stared at me. I actually got spooked. I'm a pretty religious dude who often ghost hunts and goes to creepy abandoned spots, but I kid you not, I kinda heart dropped. So at this point, I go and get my silver cross and shine the flashlight on the cross so it can see the cross shining, and it immediately looks away. And I tell that if it can't cross the fence line because I don't give it permission, and it knows it can't beat the one that's on the cross, it straight up walked away and didn't look back. I come back inside. My friend goes to sleep, and I go into my bedroom where my girlfriend is asleep. I lay down next to her, and her eyes out on the back of her head. I wake her up, and it turns out she was having a sleep paralysis episode, and she had 2 other sleep paralysis episodes during the entire time that me and my friend were outside. I'm wondering if there's some cryptid who is attacking her mind while distracting us, or by coincidence, did I happen to have a raccoon hiss at us, or someone do a bird call? We see a mangled red-eyed deer, and my girlfriend all have sleep paralysis within a 2-hour period. I'm asking this as I'm pretty knowledgeable of demons and stuff, but I don't think he ward the 2 things off the same way. The deer essentially looked like it had the posture of a crab. It did not have the thick thighs in the back like a deer does. It has the legs that looked backwards and mangled. I know it could all be a coincidence, it just seems a little weird. Also, I'm aware skinwalkers are pretty much Navajo exclusive or whatever, but I don't know what else to call something like that. I'm not really sure if this is a true story or not, but I thought you'd like to hear it. Skinwalkers are not some mystical fantasy creatures. No, they are evil witches who like to cause pain and misfortune on others, and who may even cause death. In order to get their powers, they have to sacrifice somebody they most love. The more they sacrifice, the more powers they get. This is an old story that happened in the 40s or the 50s, about a man who lived with his sheep and his dog in the middle of nowhere in his hogan. For weeks, he heard and saw strange things happening around him, like a black shadow running, knocking on his house, a man's cough, and his sheep missing and later found dead and mutilated, until he found his dog dead. Tired and afraid of this, he went to a medicine man. They told the medicine man that he was experiencing. He blessed the man and told him to cover himself with ash, leave no part uncovered, and to sit outside his house with a rifle and to wait for it to come. And when you see it, you'll know when you see it. You shoot at it, and it will leave you alone. So the man did as asked. He waited in the dark for a long time before he heard it. Something was coming towards his house. When he looked to his left, he saw a dog or a coyote. He knew it then for what it was. He slowly raised the rifle and aimed it at the dog creature and shot at it. The scary part was when the bullet hit it, instead of a dog cry, the dog creature let out the scream of a man who had just gotten shot, and the dog creature immediately turned and ran away. After that, the man didn't see no strange thing again. He even got a new dog. He fought with a skinwalker and won. At the time this story takes place, I was 14, almost 15, and a sophomore in high school. I've never had a paranormal encounter in my life, but I still somewhat believed in the paranormal. This is the first close encounter I have ever had in my life. In case you don't know what a skinwalker is, they're people that can morph into an animal of their choice and originate from Navajo legends. I'll go further into depth about why I think this encounter was a skinwalker later in the story. So, I was at my cousin's house with both of my stepbrothers, and all of us were really into Nerf guns at the time. I'll refer to my cousin as T, my older stepbrother is J, and my younger as A. For our entertainment, we decided to split up into 2 teams and have what we called a Nerf war, very creatively. The goal of the game was to knock down both of our opponents by hitting them once with a Nerf bullet, as it was pretty difficult to accomplish. Once the person had been shot, they were out of the game and not able to be revived. And once both of them had been shot, the game had been won by the other team. Simple enough. The boundaries were a couple of blocks long, which included a nearby park that we liked to stay at and hide from the other team. Because it was getting dark, we had to leave my cousin's house soon. We decided to have another quick round. We watched as T and A ran in the direction of a nearby ditch, so J and I decided to run towards the park, which was behind us. We ran for a couple of minutes until we reached the huge fake rock that had a slide on top, and we decided to camp up there. For a few minutes we sat there, waiting to see them try to sneak up on us, because they knew that we were at the park. Jay and I noticed that there was a dog next to the jungle gym, walking around aimlessly, and we thought that maybe it was T's Chihuahua. However, we heard somebody call its name, and realized that there was a guy standing in the nearby garden. Naturally, we didn't think much of it, except how it was creepy that he was just standing there. I tried to rationalize and told Jay that he was probably watering the plants, despite the fact that he obviously wasn't. Before we could realize, the man was gone, but again, we thought nothing of it. Out in the field next to the park, I spotted two figures lying down next to a hill, T and A. Jay and I split up. I hid behind a row of bongos and we hid behind a nearby rock. After a few moments of silence between us, I told him that we should move into the nearby brush and stalk them from afar, but he refused. Out of nowhere, we heard a loud screech coming from the nearby brush. We thought it was some type of bird, specifically an eagle, but I also suspected it could be a coyote. A few moments later, I was looking up and admiring the sky when I noticed a shooting star, which I initially thought was a plane. I'm not sure whether it has any significance to the story, but you'll find out why I think it might be later. From that point on, we both had very strange feelings that we were being watched by somebody or something. I had very weird tingling sensations that started at my feet and went up to my chest multiple times, and Jay said he had a burning chest pain that lasted for a long while, to the point where he could barely run. After we left our spot and were going to take a back route to T's house, we heard the screech again, but it sounded like it came from where we were hiding. Ultimately, we won the match, but our parents were looking for us and we had to leave his house. T decided to spend the night at our house as we were waiting for him in the car. A asked if we too heard the screech. We started to discuss what we had thought it was, and we all agreed that it was some kind of eagle. However, after discussing it with T, he told us what he had encountered. When they were in the field stalking us, T said he heard the screech right in his ear, which is nowhere near where we heard it. After that, he said he felt like somebody was behind him, and he turned to see what was bothering him. Right as he did, he said he was drawn to the same shooting star we saw. After we had left the park, which they weren't aware of, they said they both heard Jay's voice calling desperately out for A, his brother, thinking he might have been hurt. T decided that he should go help, but something just felt off. They ultimately decided to go back to the house. Looking back, we learned why if they didn't make that decision, they would have been as good as dead. T said that he had the exact same feelings as we did while making his way back to the house. Because I was a big fan of horror stories and had heard much about skinwalkers, I asked them if they thought it could possibly be a skinwalker, but nobody really thought so. I decided to do some research, and we all realized that a skinwalker fits the situation perfectly. First of all, an eagle is one of the most common forms that skinwalkers take, which would explain how we all thought the screech came from an eagle. Secondly, both teams heard the screech at different locations, and skinwalkers are known to move extremely quick. Third, they can morph into familiar faces and also imitate voices, which would explain how they heard Jay's voice calling out after we left the park. Lastly, they can actually dig through your mind and know what your fears are, and T was always afraid of people getting hurt while we were playing. That night, we were all extremely scared because of all the videos and stories we watched about skinwalkers. However, the final piece to the puzzle was when I woke up to A standing in the doorway, crying. Our dog had died the night before in her sleep. According to one of the many sources I found, I read that some skinwalkers are able to poison the loved ones of their victims after an encounter. What do you guys think? Do you think what I encountered was an actual skinwalker, or was it just a huge coincidence? I've never really been one to buy into the whole skinwalker nonsense that's talked about frequently in the Navajo culture, as well as just hearing it in the general southern United States area. But I have something that genuinely happened to me that's really left me terrified. Let me explain this to you. I was driving in the later evening in southern Arizona, far away from any Indian reservation to my knowledge. This is one of the things that is a red flag in my head, because it just doesn't make any sense. I guess I realized that they're everywhere in this region, and don't pertain to one specific reservation. So, I'm driving, and there's no other cars on the road at this time. It's getting pretty dusk, so the sun is setting. By the way, if you have ever been in Arizona during a sunset, it is absolutely gorgeous. Just saying. That's really the only positive side note to this entire story. I'm coming up to a bend in the road, or should I say a bend in the hill, when I go up it and over, and blocking the road up ahead is probably what I can make out to be around 6 or 7 coyotes, just sitting there in the middle of the road, facing my oncoming vehicle. What the hell? I whispered to myself. Why are there these coyotes sitting there in the middle of the road, blocking it? But as I pull closer, I realize something is horribly wrong. Not only are these coyotes much larger in size than your average coyote, but they all looked terrible. They were disfigured, emaciated. They looked like they had a terrible case of mange, and they all looked deformed. Before I even came to a stop, I got a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I felt like I needed to turn around and leave in that instant. There is nobody else on this road, so of course all 6 or 7 of these things turn around and their attention towards me. That's when I noticed something even more unnerving. All of them have solid white eyes. No iris, no pupils, nothing. There was nothing animalistic about them, and that feeling in the pit of my stomach grew worse and worse each second that I sat in this situation. I hadn't even fully stopped the vehicle before I quickly swerved the vehicle in a 180 fashion and hauled out of there. I can't say for certain that this was a pack of skinwalkers, but I just find it very weird that you have a pack of 7 of them, all looking deformed and covered in mange and emaciated looking. Gosh, they looked so grotesque, and in a small group like that, there's no explaining it. When I pulled up to them, they all had their heads down, but still facing in my direction. And like I said, they all turned up to face me in unison. The way they turned their heads to look at me right in the face was just beyond creepy. They weren't even looking at my car though, and even though I had my headlights on, they were looking right through my windshield, directly at my face. I could feel it. I sensed they were looking into my soul. Man, did that not give me the heebie-jeebies. And even as I type this out, it's making me relive that horrible memory. Now, I get freaked out every time I'm driving down there, which I still do frequently because I have many family and friends that live in the area. I've heard all sorts of weird stuff that goes on in the desert, like UFOs, alien abductions, weird stuff like that, but I never in my life would have imagined skinwalkers trying to stop me in the middle of the road. Like I said, it may have just been a coincidence, but I don't think I would have got that feeling in my gut had it just been a pack of regular coyotes. There was just something so off about all of it. I trust my gut instinct when it tells me there's something wrong. And boy, my entire body was just screaming at me to get out of there. Anyway, I hope this email isn't too long for you to read, but I just wanted to share with you my Skinwalker experience, or what I believe to be a Skinwalker experience. Stay out of Arizona if you can. It's not meant for people like us. So, a couple of my family friends have some Navajo in them. I'll call her Sarah, for the sake of her identity being shared. Sarah is a close friend of mine and is fully Caucasian. Her husband, whom I'll call Mark, is full-blooded Navajo. We live up here in the Pacific Northwest, and his parents are from the reservation. They came up here when he was much younger, and he pretty much grew up here with them, and they eventually moved back to the res full-time. He was old enough that he decided to stay up here and start his life while they still lived and moved back down there. Every once in a while, Sarah and Mark still go down there and visit his family, who again are full-blooded Navajo. Mind you, they are very enriched in their culture and very religious in their Navajo traditions. Sarah has had plenty of Skinwalker stories, and she even recites them by their actual name, which I will not repeat for the sake of my own protection. Silly or not, I don't care what anybody thinks after the story Sarah told me. I don't want to be at the mercy of these things. Even though she has shared with me several, I'll recount to you one that really sticks out to me. Sarah and Mark had gone down for a week to go visit his family, and if you didn't know, there's virtually zero cell service down there in that reservation. In fact, I think there's a special cell phone service that's meant just for the res. I digress. So, she's down there at night, smoking a cigarette, and her whole family is telling her that's a bad idea. If you throw the butt of the cigarette down, these things will come. I can't remember off the top of my head what Sarah did, but she attracted one of these things, because later on, when she went to bed, it came. It came up to the house, and she said that you could feel its energy approaching. She told me it was the most eerie, scary sensation she has ever felt. And this is a girl who grew up in a house filled with poltergeist. She said she fell into a sleep-like state, or trance, have you, and had horrible nightmares that this black, smoky vapor shape flew into her bedroom through the window and clung to her ceiling and took shape of a demon and terrorized her for the entire night. The very next morning, all of Mark's family was doing rituals and prayer to ward off this Skinwalker that she had invited to come to the house, even though it was an accident. They take these situations very seriously because to them, a Skinwalker isn't just some mysterious cryptid creature that walks up and terrorizes a random family. These things will hunt family members down and cause ill luck and misfortune to happen, even as far as casting spells on good people, making them sick and ruining their lives. They are dangerous beings of darkness. Sarah told me it's true. They are crawling all over the res, and you just have to be aware of the things you do and say to not draw them near. It's also very common for people just coming out of the reservation that are not familiar with tradition to accidentally attract these creatures and to bring bad luck and misfortune upon themselves in the process. So, I want to start off this email by saying that I'm not too familiar with really any of the areas in New Mexico, so I can't fully recall exactly where I was. At the time, I drove a 1998 Honda Civic. It was a piece of crap. And of course, out of all the times it decided to poop out was when I was on this smaller road. And it was while I was driving semi-cross country. It was a hot day, so first the AC went out, then the car went out, and here I am, stuck in the New Mexico desert, and I have to walk my happy ass through a very small stretch of desert because the road I was on was leaving in the total opposite direction. Luckily for me though, I still had signal, and my GPS worked, so I figured I would just walk through a few miles through the small sections of desert to go run to the needed area to get help. Here's where things get weird. Off to my left was a small bluff that I did not notice right away, or at least noticed what was on it. I began to feel like I was being watched and got a really uncomfortable feeling. I shake it off at first, thinking the heat in the sun is probably just getting to me because I'm not used to this kind of heat. I'm looking around and I happen to turn and notice this dark figure watching me from on top of this smaller bluff. I'm not terribly far away from it, so I can make out some details, although they are minor. It looked like a very slim, slender thing. A being in black, torn, tattered robes from what I can describe. Whoever or whatever it was had a large animal skull on top of their head, with horns. They were covered from head to toe in this black, dirty, tattered robe, so I couldn't exactly see who it was or what was watching me. But when I mean they were slender, I mean like really slender, stick thin. I'm talking Ethiopians starving and haven't eaten in 3 weeks slender. It was unnatural, and it really gave me the creeps. So I kept on walking, but this person thing just kept watching me the entire time. I would be periodically checking over my shoulder to see if this freak was watching me, and at one point or another, it was gone. This made me feel even more nervous now, like this person was going to pursue me and chase me, so I quickly tried to pick up my pace and double time it. I don't know who this was, or what their intentions were, or why they were watching me so closely, but I was not comfortable being their Truman Show entertainment. The only thing I really know about the desert is that there's Las Vegas and of course Area 51, where all sorts of creepy, freaky stuff happens. Oh, I forgot about the Roswell crash. In fact, I don't even think I was more than 50 to 100 miles away from that area, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, screw what happened here. I didn't want any part to play. I eventually made it the 4-mile trek, and made it to where I needed to go get help for my Honda Civic. But that was probably one of the creepiest times I can ever recall happening in my life. There is an upside though. I'm very thankful that this happened to me at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I can't imagine, nor do I even want to think about it, had this happened to me if it was after 10, or at night when it's totally pitch black outside. I think I probably just would have called for somebody to pick me up, or waited for hours or something for an Uber. I'm never walking through the desert at night, let alone during the day anymore. Especially after something like this is happening. You can count me out. I don't have very much personal experience with skinwalkers, but I do have a very disturbing story to relate to you. Very recently, a close family friend of mine died, and the circumstances in which he was killed, I believe, are even more strange. Let me give into details. I frequently visit the Navajo Res, where a lot of my family lives. I'm mostly full-blooded myself, but not quite. But I do not live on the Res. I do, however, spend a lot of time here, because most of my friends and family are full-blooded. Well, we have a close friend, whose name I will keep unidentified, but I will note him to you as John. John was a very recently found dead man, just a little ways out of town. But here's the manner in which he died that we all found very odd. He was discovered by his eldest son, and he had not died from exposure, or tripping and falling, or anything that you think an older man would. The blood from his body was drained completely. He was as pale as a sheet when they took him, and they could not find any marks on him that even show any way for the blood to be drained out of his body. He was found lying in the middle of the desert, completely untouched, and not even a single part of decay. It looked like he had been there for probably about 2 days. There were no signs of a struggle, like he had been attacked or anything. It really bothered me. We've been mourning his death, but we want more than that. We want answers. He was a close part of our personal community, and even more so, an integral part of our family. Without him, it's never going to be the same. But I'm reaching out to you because I want answers, and I wanted to know if you had any. My older brother speculates that it was indeed a skinwalker that did this to him. Unfortunately, John was well known in the community for making deals with people he could not keep, and ripping them off from time to time. He has also made several enemies over the years and burned bridges. Maybe not enemies is the right word, but people that he just rubbed the wrong way, that would have any reason to do harm to him. I worry, well, we are all worried that he screwed the wrong person, and they may have hexed him or put a curse on him. It's no secret that there are many around here who practice dark arts in secrecy, and if this is true, then I know that it was only a matter of time before John sealed his own fate. Out of all my time being here, though, I have never heard of anybody being found with all the blood being drained from their bodies, with no indication of how it was drained. No marks, no holes, no gashes, no cuts. The other thing that really struck me was that he had been sitting out in the hot desert sun for 48 hours plus, completely dead. Yet, biologically, he showed zero signs of starting decaying or beginning to rot. I really don't know what to think of this, but myself, again, I want to know if you have any answers. If you decide to read this and your viewers hear me, hopefully they can put some answers, because this really disturbed me and I want to know the truth. I firmly believe that I am being targeted currently by a Skinwalker, and it is coming to my house every night and trying to pull me away. Every night when I try and go to sleep, I can feel this thing approaching my house. It's this incredibly horrible feeling that just sits in your stomach and works its way all throughout your body. It's this intense fear that overtakes you. You can feel it in the air, and it is so thick you can cut it with a knife. Then, the voices start. I hear random voices all around and outside the house, like there is some big congregation of people that I can't see. I usually can't make out what they're saying, but it sounds hushed, whispers, or quiet talking. It's never consecutive or consistent. It's random every time, in volume and location. What disturbs me is that I think it's a Skinwalker, and here's why. Throughout all the course of hearing all these voices, the Skinwalker, I believe, is imitating my dead mother and calls my name in her voice from outside the house. My mother passed away of breast cancer about 7 years ago in the spring. She's dead. She ain't coming back. Something is out there mimicking her voice and trying to call me outside to get me out of the trailer. Listen, I've never been a person that pays attention to ghosts or any sort of thing like that. Sure, I have watched ghost hunters from time to time, but paid no attention to anything of that realm of the unseen, so to speak. So, I don't know if this is a ghost or if it's some sort of demon. I've told a few people who I know that I am close with, and they all point to a Skinwalker. I had to actually look up what a Skinwalker was, and now that I know what it is, it's kind of freaking me out. This happens every single night, and it happens the same way. It does not let up. I don't know why it wants me, or what I did to antagonize it. Did I cross into a certain territory, or did I say something wrong? Is there anything I can do to repel this thing and get it to stop harassing me? So far, it has not tried to open my door or approach my trailer in any way. But every night, I hear it out there, mimicking my mother's voice, trying to get me outside. I haven't seen it because, to be completely honest with you, I am terrified to open up my window and look out and see that it's there. I don't want to know what it looks like. I don't care. I just want it gone, whatever the hell it is. I have a story that will terrify you, and I've been wanting to share it with you. But first, before I do, I wanted to make a connection with the story that you previously read. I'm not exactly sure where you acquired this story from, whether it be from Reddit or that somebody actually sent it to you. And no, I don't know this individual. I just made the connection when I heard the story. But this story, the one that you read, is about an individual who visited the Bullfrog Marina in Lake Powell, Utah. That's exactly where mine happened. Years ago, I was visiting there while I was driving up the state, and of course I stopped there at nighttime. I was stalked by something, what I considered to be a creature of the night maybe. Maybe it was a Skinwalker. Maybe it was something else, but whatever it was really big and black, and had bright yellow eyes that were watching me. I am familiar with the idea of Bigfoot, and I don't want to say that this was a Bigfoot. It did not look like a big, bulky football player in any way. It had a very slim build, and was lanky and tall. It kind of crouched over, and was hunched, if that makes any sense. Plus, from the figure I saw at least, from what I can make out the face, it was weird looking. I can't really describe it to you, but from average depictions of a Bigfoot, it didn't look anything like it. I really don't know what's out in the desert like that, so if we're going to cross all of our T's and dot all of our I's, I'm going to say it's a Skinwalker, going by what little I know. The first time I noticed it was when my headlights hit it, and it was so black that I couldn't even see any distinctive features. Whatever it did not want to be seen, because it remained hiding behind some sagebrush. Scared me to death is what it did, and it continued to watch me the entire time I was there. It got braver and braver, and crept closer and closer until I finally leapt. If you must know, because I can't leave this detail out now, because the story won't really make sense why I saw this thing and I continued to stay there. I had brought this girl with me, whom I wasn't quite dating, but we had this on and off fling. I was trying to get her to do the nasty with me, and she had not seen this thing yet. I was not going to let that thing stop my selfish sexual conquest. Even though I knew this thing was out there and was creeping ever closer to me in my vehicle, I tried to pursue this girl, and it didn't actually end up working out. To be honest, I'm just kind of an asshole, so I guess I deserved it. I never said anything or made mention of this thing approaching our car slowly to get to the girl, but it got too close for comfort, and I decided to cut my efforts short and get out of there before it got too out of control. That same girl, I eventually lost communication a few months after this happened, and no, we never did end up hooking up. But that's my experience with the Bullfrog Marina. Sure, it might be a beautiful area to check out, but I strongly advise you only go there during the day, because there is something sinister that hangs out there at night, and they will surely check you out. Okay, so this just happened 2 weeks ago, and I am still scared absolutely poopless. I don't want to be vulgar, so you can guess that that last word is actually a swear word. I was driving down through New Mexico late at night. If I had ever listened to any creepy stories, I guess I would have known that that's a huge mistake, right? Well, I don't normally listen to creepy stories, so I'm driving. I'm the only one on the road at the time. I have my radio connected to my phone that is streaming from Spotify. I'm blasting Africa by Toto when I start to hear this static that gradually overtakes the song. I'm now wondering what's going on. Why is Spotify acting up? Spotify doesn't act like that. It's like I was listening to the radio and there was an interference. That's exactly what it sounded like, but that's impossible. I'm streaming from my phone, which by the way has 4 bars at the time, so there's impossible for any reception to go down. The static continues to get louder, and eventually overtakes the entire song before the song ends. Now, I'm beginning to freak out, as I'm half looking down at my phone screaming at it, and my Spotify, while trying to keep my eyes on the road. That's when I begin to notice a horrible sight around me. These tall, horrible figures that are completely black with glowing red and yellow eyes are approaching me from all sides of the desert. If that's not scary enough, in that moment, my car starts deaccelerating, even though I'm pushing as hard as I can on the acceleration pedal, and nothing is working. To say I was going through a full-blown panic is a complete understatement of my emotions in the moment. My car begins to slow down more and more. 40 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour. These shapes, these humanoid figures were getting closer and closer to my vehicle. They were incredibly tall, but they didn't exactly resemble people, but they did have 2 glowing eyes. I thought I was having a nightmare, or maybe I had fallen asleep at the wheel. This was the worst vision or hallucination that I've ever had in my life, if this is what it really was. Before my vehicle came to a complete stop. Keep in mind, right now the radio won't turn off. It's blaring static. My vehicle is about to come to a complete standstill, and it's still on. Nothing by looks has malfunctioned, and I'm pressing as hard as I can on the gas pedal, and these things are nearing my vehicle. In that moment, in my rearview mirror, I see 2 large lights coming my way, and I just remember saying to myself, "Oh, thank you, Lord Jesus." And as soon as I said that, the static went away within a second, and my car began accelerating again. It was a semi-truck that was hauling ass heading towards wherever it had to go. but it was coming up on me fast. And I also noticed those things that were approaching my car were now gone. You bet that I hauled it up to 70, 80 miles an hour as fast as I could and cruised it out of there. Africa continued to play at the exact same spot that the static fully took over, even though I hadn't messed with the song, paused it, or stopped it. I was so shaken that I had to stop at a nearest gas station and collect myself before searching and finding a motel and calling it a night. Not my original plan at all. They say freaky stuff happens out here in the desert, and I don't know what I would call this experience, except a horrible nightmare come to life. About 20 years ago now, I dated an Inuit girl who was living in Washington, D.C. I had just graduated college with a bachelor's in anthropology, so I was absolutely fascinated with her stories of her childhood in Alaska. Anyway, one night over drinks, the conversation moves to skinwalkers. I had never heard of them, so of course I wanted to know more. I never thought of her as a superstitious person, but this topic was clearly unsettling to her. Basically, she was of the mind that she wasn't sure if she believed in them, but they played such a prominent role in her cultural upbringing and were so terrifying that, real or not, it was better to not dig too far into them. A few days later, we were in the DuPont Circle, or the DC, when the topic pops into my head again. We were on our way to get lunch, and I brought it up. She got pretty mad and said that it was stupid to talk about them, and when there were so many people around, because there could be one nearby. I laughed and played it off, when all of a sudden, this guy across the street, facing away from me, stopped and stared directly at me. I felt terror to my core, and I can't explain it, but my urge to get away was overwhelming. There was no possible way for him to have heard me, but his gaze did not waver. He was absolutely looking at me. Even as I'm writing this, I'm getting chills. I genuinely am pretty skeptical and try to find a logical explanation to things, but whatever that was scares me to this day. I'm Rick Martinez, a truck driver, coming back up from Utah, going into Nevada. I pulled over to update my logs and got up on top of a hill to a rest area. Nothing but desert all around me. No cars, no nothing. As I was writing into my logbook, I felt like somebody was staring at me. So I looked up and saw this old man standing there, all raggedy, with a long beard, just staring at me. So I rolled down my window and asked him, "Are you okay?" And he would not answer. So I repeated, "Are you alright? Do you need help? Do you want some water?" He still would not answer me. So I opened the door and stood on my step and said, "I'm not coming down. You need to come over here." He wouldn't answer. So I told him, "Okay, old man, last chance. If you need help, tell me now." So I got back in my truck, closed the door, put my truck in gear, and started to roll off. He started to walk alongside the truck. I'm thinking I'm going to end up running this guy over, so I just said, "Let me get out of here." As I pick up speed, he starts running alongside of the truck. And I'm thinking this is freaking crazy. This old guy is out of his mind. I began picking up more speed, getting ready to get back on the highway, and I turned to look to make sure I'm not going to run this old guy over. And he's not there. What I see instead is a coyote running next to me, and that coyote kept up with the truck for at least a couple of blocks, until finally I started pulling away from him. I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror anymore. I just wanted to get away. This was midwinter, so about early January, and my cousin and I were out in the woods playing. Mind you, we were 6 and 7 at the time, and we stumbled upon a carcass. Now, this carcass was of a robin bird, freshly killed. But the way it was killed was unlike anything neither him or I had ever seen before. Up until this point, I had been hunting with my dad every year since I was about 4, and I had seen dead birds and eaten carcasses before. It was torn in two, one half not too far away from the other, and its entrails had been eaten, but not anything else on it like anything conventional. Now we get back to playing, and notice other oddities in the small patch of woods we were in. The hill next to his barn was steep and snow-covered, but every so often, there were patches of bird feathers, almost ritualistically plotted all around to mark something, a territorial boundary, I'd presume. But anyway, further down the small trail that led to the road uphill, we seen it. It was a humanoid, thin, brown, hairless, and soulless. It had deep, dark pools for eyes like craters in its face, and was built so wrong. Its arms were ungodly long and slim to a point where you could see bone. Now at this point, the tough guy in me and my cousin thought we were going to begin to yell and throw our hands as we charged it. It was gone in a matter of seconds, bolting in the tree line, into the road, and gone the other side. After this, my cousin and I ran inside, almost began to cry, questioning on what we had just experienced. The story, however, does not end there. Fast forward to 2016. My cousin is in the living room, and he's watching TV. The dog had to go out for a dump or something, so he let it out and watched her. That's when this thing makes itself known. In the tree line, it leers up and looks dead at him. But when it noticed the rushing dog coming at it, barking like hell, it hunched over and froze. The dog stopped suddenly right in front of it and began to sniff, clearly confused. Soon enough, the dog walked away, crapped, and was let back inside. This thing glanced at my cousin one more time and walked off. It's 2020 now, and my cousin had only one more experience like this since, and that was when he was with his girlfriend. They were ready to get down and dirty with it by his car in a bigger patch of secluded woods by his house when he heard this noise, similar to a bear, but with a more human tone to it. After hearing this, they hauled butt back to his car, and ever since then, he refused to go back. After having an in-depth conversation with him, recollecting all of this information, we agreed to try and hunt a Skinwalker, or a Wendigo, or something like that. Take my story as you will, but I just want to ask you, what the hell did he see? What the hell stalks the rural woods of New Hampshire to such an extent? Mind you, when I seen this thing, it was about the size of myself, a 7-year-old. When my cousin seen it, he said it was much larger, yet retained the hairless and skinny physique. Should we hunt and try to kill it, or leave it be? Whatever it was intelligent, ritualistic, and cunning. I'm just curious to find out if it was a Skinwalker or not, and take my word for it, because I do believe most of these things hunt and stalk the rural areas of the North American wilderness. My cousin once told me about a time he and a friend heard what he honestly thinks was a Skinwalker. I believe they may have also had a glimpse on a creature, but I'm not sure. Now, my cousin is a big guy. He's not scared easily, and this time, he was truly scared, which is concerning. Anyway, he and his buddy were camping and went for a bike ride. They heard something in front and heard noises, and then they backed away and heard it run around and get in front of them, or close to it. So they both gunned it, hearing the creature following them. My cousin says the creature sounded like it was made of sticks, and I believe he saw something though. He didn't describe the thing to me. There was another time that him and a different friend heard a large creature walk past them at night. The creature, they say, was massive and made strange noises. They also said they heard birds chirping around it, but it sounded fake. The birds, I mean. The area they were in was basically a massive hill, and it was all downhill, which was basically a 90-degree drop, meaning it had to be massive for them to hear it that close. This was 7 months ago, but I still haven't gotten any answers from anybody, so I'll share it and see what you guys think. So I just got back from my walk. It's about 7 p.m. for me. The sun was setting, and it's already overcast, so it's a bit darker than usual. And for a little background, I live in Phoenix, Arizona. One of those houses, kind of away from the main city. Out right by a mountain preserve, I guess you could say. It's basically connected to it. A very cool area, but very unsettling at night. That's where I go on my walks. About 15 minutes away from the house, right in front of me, I see this strange-looking creature about 10 feet away from me. Seemed to be floating, completely motionless and hard to make out exactly what it looked like, but it appeared to have glowing red eyes, one snapped horn, and another full horn on its head. Long black demonic arms with sharp-looking claws, wearing a dark black, raggedy cloak. I looked at it for about 2 whole seconds before it vanished, almost like fog. Then it appeared again further down my walk, about 5 to 6 minutes later, even further than before, almost like it was watching me from a distance. I was listening to my playlist at the time, and suddenly, a loud, horrible high-pitched blood-curdling scream blasted through my headphones in the middle of the song, and the creature vanished. It was the loudest scream that I've ever heard, but it was probably because it was directly into my ears, but still, it made me drop to my knees. After that, it seemed to vanish. I didn't see it again, but the rest of the way home, I felt a presence, as well as being watched. I've had lots of encounters with other creatures, but this one was probably the most terrifying I've had. I've speculated it being a skinwalker, or even a banshee, but would definitely like to hear other opinions. I'll never forget the lessons passed along from my grandfather about how to avoid, protect, and defend yourself from skinwalkers when alone. Our family owns a large ranch in Utah, and we are often out in the middle of nowhere, without a town, for over 70 miles when we are running cattle. From the time we could read, our grandfather taught us lessons he learned directly from the Ute medicine tribe members about how to protect yourself and defend yourself from skinwalkers, if necessary. He said the main thing was to never show fear. Even if you were out in the middle of the wilderness, you had to remain confident. Skinwalkers feed on fear. They use the night, the uncertainty of the wilderness, and the defenselessness of a man in the middle of nature with only a knife or a gun to their advantage. This sounds general, but how do you really not show fear in nature, even if alone? Here is how it was broken down to me. Number 1. Always travel in pairs if you can. If you cannot, bring a dog. If you cannot, and I mean absolutely can't bring a dog, then you'll have to exert your dominance. Number 2. Exerting your dominance camp version. The Utes use nature methods to exert their dominance. First and foremost, they would encircle their camps with a ditch about 1 foot deep and about 10 inches wide. The bottom of the ditch would be covered with bark and then overlaid with small pebbles so it looked like it had a cement bottom. Then, on the sides, 16-inch pieces of branch would be nailed into the sides to form walls on both. The tops of the pieces of branch were rubbed with a combination of sage and sap daily, and the trench, or the encirclement, was used as the latrine for the male members of the tribe. They would urinate in the trench all day, so the scent would be rife at all times. When mixed with sage and sap, the combo on top, it sent a clear message to the skinwalkers that this land was not to be penetrated. They did not stop here. They would collect sweat, as much as they could, and place it in wooden casks. The men and women who had generated enough sweat would come to the casks and empty out. The casks were then taken and strategically thrown on the tallest trees around the camp, stretching as far as a quarter-mile out. Each night, the casks were poured on a different set of trees, starting with the farthest out and working back inside. Finally, animal hearts were placed on pointed pikes alongside walking trails 10 feet up, so only birds could eat them. This practice ensured skinwalkers would never penetrate the actual radius of the camp. Obviously, this practice had its limits. The next part details with the out in the wilderness portion. Number 3. Exerting your dominance, the wild version. In the wild, one had to adapt, but the Utes still stressed the urine, and if possible, the sage and sap mix encirclement. Because warriors and hunters didn't often have enough sage or time to set up a full encirclement every night with bark, pebbles, branch pieces, sage, and sap, they would just focus on the encirclement. It is very important to note this. My grandfather stressed this over and over again. It was imperative that you created the encirclement before you set up camp, and if at all possible, before sunset. All who could then urinate would. But the Utes took it a step further. They made sure to bring sacks of urine with them, made from elk lungs, and they would portion off a little bit along with their own, night by night, to ensure that the encirclement was well protected. To this day, my brothers and I do the same, but with gas tanks. They would also have a big bag filled with animal hearts and lay out about 2 to 4 on pikes outside the encirclement every camp. Finally, if they could bring a few small casks of sweat, they would. But in its place, they would often bring a gelled mix of sap and sweat and paint them on the tallest trees near the camp. The other very important thing that they did when they were on their own was to create an abnormally large fire. This would usually be done at the front of a rock face to minimize the chances of a fire. The word my grandfather used to describe this was 5 feet high teepee. The larger-than-life fire will act as a deterrent when combined with the urine and animal hearts. Number 4. Exerting your dominance. These are general tips that do apply to all situations. No matter if you are alone or in a group, always create the encirclement. Bring extra urine if you can. Build the full encirclement if you can. Think. You want to send a message to all surrounding nature that you are the biggest and baddest predator around. This is how you do it. Obviously, we live in a day and age where the animal hearts aspect is a very difficult thing to procure, but that was an extra precaution anyway. Sweat. If you can get a bottle, bring it. If not, focus on the encirclement. Outside of that, there are other things one or many can do to keep skinwalkers at bay. Regulated and directed hard breathing. The Utes would do a 4-second count in and a 4-second out count breathing ceremony upon setting up camp, and just before bed. The regulated breaths show that you have the ability to change your breathing, and to do so forcefully, something that no other animal has the ability to do. Screaming 3 times as loudly as possible. The Utes would do this just before bedtime, and would always strategically place their camp in an area that would echo to send the message to skinwalkers all over the world that they were not afraid. Wearing animal skin. This would seem obvious for Native Americans, and it was, but the Utes swore that the more skin they wore, even on the hottest days, the more protected they were. When the heat was unbearable, they would wear necklaces of deer and elk and horn. They believed that to wear animal skin, even as necessary, covering in the wild, was to send a message to the skinwalker that you were not afraid of dead animals. Regarding my grandfather, the reason the Utes gave him this insider knowledge that they have not shared with any white men before or after him is because he found a hoard of Jesuit gold and silver and offered them a significant amount for his find for information on other possible Jesuit missions in Utah. The conversation took on a whole different turn when my father revealed to them an experience he had with a skinwalker more than half a century ago. I seriously need help and am terrified out of my mind. So I'll start off by saying I've never believed in anything paranormal. I'm a pretty science-based dude. I always look for a logical explanation, and I still am for this encounter. So if anybody has any ideas, let me know. I don't have much time for leisure with work recently. Been having to accept some pretty awful shifts to get by with COVID times. So, I've lost my ability to go on my evening walks, which are a method of stress relief for me. It had been a while since I had gone on one, so 3 nights ago, I decided to just go for a late night walk. I put on my headband flashlight and decided to take a path that I hadn't in ages. There's a small trail near the back of my neighborhood that goes about 4 miles deep into the woods. The plan was to walk about 1.5 miles and take the parallel path to come back. I make it down to around 1.3 miles, according to my Fitbit, and I start getting that feeling that I'm being watched. I turn off my headlight and sit still to listen. At this point, I'm more concerned that there's a guy following me who is up to no good. I heard clear footsteps in the leaves off the trail, and they've been behind me for nearly 5 minutes. I stopped thinking it was an animal or another walker and became worried. Sitting there for probably 3 to 4 minutes, I hear nothing at all. I turn back on my headlight and decide to start walking quickly back home. About 2 minutes later, I hear footsteps again. This time it sounds different. Sounds like 4 feet instead of 2 walking, and it's walking at the same increased speed that I am. I turn around quickly with my headlight and my phone light and point it behind me. Silence. I get angry and yell out, "Leave me alone. I'm calling the cops, and if you come at me, I have a knife." Silence. I yell again to get the hell out of here and start walking towards where I heard the walking. About 20 yards out, hard to fully make out because the flashlight doesn't reach too far, I see what looks like a literal naked man running full speed on all 4s into the woods. Normally, I'd chalk that up to drugs, but my area does not have a drug problem, and there were some details that led me to believe that it was not a person. For one, they were damn near hairless, completely bald, pale white skin, and of course the way they ran on all 4s just looked natural. Not like when you try and run on all 4s and look stupid. It looked like its bone structure was designed to walk on all 4s. There was no hunched look, their back was flat, and they were fast. Last thing that happened was straight out of a horror movie. I hadn't heard anything in a while on my way back, but kept turning around just to be sure. With about 0.3 miles left to go, until I was in the clear, I hear a mad dash through the leaves. I whip around and it stops on a dime. I see the edges of its head behind a tree and yell loudly to try and intimidate. What I heard next, I'll never forget in my entire life. It crackled like a monkey, a noise I've literally only heard in nature documentaries. The tone was that of mockery, a predator having fun with me. It didn't stick around. I sprinted as fast as possible back home. I'd love to believe that there was some prank going on, or some rabid, bald, diseased coyote, but I got a pretty clear look at it. It wasn't. It had human feet and human hands, a human head and a human buttocks, but nothing else about it was human. I called the cops after and told them that there was a man following me. I didn't want to say it was some creature because they'd think I was crazy. They didn't find anything, but they did see quite a bit of activity in the leaves and dirt, about 50 feet from where the trail was, leading far back into the woods before it got to a large stretch of grass where no footprints were seen. Please tell me I'm not crazy, and that this was some elaborate prank or maybe a deformed man. So, about 2 months ago, me and a friend were cruising, looking for a place to smoke and chill, and you know how that goes. So we came across these old springs, which is now a state forest, middle of nowhere. It's late and dark. We walk down a trail, stop at a pond and start to mess around, and we start hearing this bloody curdly scream. I've never heard anything like it before. At first, I thought it was an angry animal, but the more it made noise, the more I realized I had no idea what the hell it was. It really scared me for a second. I tried shining my light in the direction of the sound, but there was a pond separating us from the woods that the sound was coming from. Maybe that was a good thing. So, it did this screaming for some seconds. Then it would stop. This on and off happened for like 5 to 10 minutes. We leave. We weren't there that long at all, and I was so confused but never thought anything of it. Was just more concerned about my friend I was with. But later that night, when I was dozing off to sleep, I heard that screaming in my head, and it jolted me awake. So, I began looking up different animals and all the types of noises that there are. Nothing matched. I still couldn't find anything that matches it. Then I learned of these Skinwalker type things. I'm like, okay, I believe anything is possible anymore. I know my dad and mom's side both have close native blood. Mom has Cherokee, and dad has Chippewa. Okay, I'm sorry to bore you with this, but this is where it gets weird. Today, my mom just brought this up. Spring State Park Forest. I've never told anyone about this experience, and how her boyfriend went there, and how he found a very nice arrowhead there. Didn't think much of it. So I'm falling asleep, and all of a sudden it clicks. I go online and search. Native Americans settled there and got water from the springs. I can't find much info about it like this ever. I've posted about this before, but I've never had an experience quite like this. I've had people sending me animal sounds and all sorts of stuff, but I can't find anything that matches it. We don't have cougars or mountain lions out here, and all we have is deer, bunnies, geese, and ducks and cows. This scream that I'm hearing is not human, and it's loud enough that it's not coming from any known animal that I can tell you. So I really don't know what to think or say at this point. I'm a long-haul truck driver, so I'm no stranger to the States, and I've seen things that I can't quite explain, but this is by far the weirdest thing to ever happen to me. So, I was driving through Arizona, heading westbound on I-40, and I'd finally hit Flagstaff and got out at a truck stop and handled my business. As I left from Flagstaff, I ran by mile marker 185. It's about 10 miles from Flagstaff. As I passed mile marker 185, there was what seemed to be a person hitchhiking. The only problem was that this guy was huge, like 8 feet tall, looking straight into the passenger window of my semi-truck. On top of that, it seemed to be as wide as the truck from shoulder to shoulder. I passed the hitchhiker at 70 miles an hour, or so I thought. About half a mile down the road, I saw the exact same person or thing, and once I passed it, but once again. This kept happening, even 20 miles down the road to mile marker 165. I saw it every few miles, and after I passed mile marker 165, I didn't see it anymore, so I thought I was done with it, but I was dead wrong. I got down to mile marker 145 and had to take a leak, so I pulled over on the side of the road to handle my business. I was about halfway done when I heard an ear-piercing scream mix between what sounded like a deer and a human. And as soon as I heard it, I started looking around, and just outside the halo of my headlights, I saw it. I was never more confused and scared in my life. I tried to figure out what it was when I heard something flying through the air. Suddenly, I heard a thump thump, and sitting 3 feet away from me was a huge rock the size of a basketball. It had to have been at least 80 pounds. When I saw that, I pretty much noped out of there. That thing threw it at me, and it landed 3 feet away. I wasted no time trying to hop back in the truck and get away from whatever that thing was. As I passed it, it just stared me down, and I never saw it again. Can somebody please tell me what I saw? I'm a 17-year-old male in Texas, a little northeast of San Antonio. Now, from what I've heard, however, they don't hunt in my region. I don't know if this is false about skinwalkers. If somebody knows otherwise, please say so. A brief description of what I saw in my first encounter was a pale or light peach-colored humanoid that was about 4 feet tall. Its face lacked a mouth, had snake-like slits for nostrils. Its eyes were the most startling though. They weren't eyes per se, but more like an absence of light, like bottomless pits of existence. The further you looked into them, they were like an abyss of light that didn't let anything out. On my second encounter, my friends and I were on a traditional hobo night. Now, a hobo night was an occasional Friday night that our friend group would spend walking around, talking, and sleeping on the streets. Yeah, I know this sounds dumb, though it humbles oneself and makes you appreciate what you have. For legality's sake, I'll leave out the rest. This particular night, we were staying in a wooded area. My entire body tensed up with fear and adrenaline after hearing heavy footsteps near us. I'm not one to be scared easily due to a really messed up childhood, but that is a story all to itself. Anyway, I was shaking. It was hunting that night because it got really close and did not make a lot of noise. My group had 3 guys and a girl. Now, for personal sake, I don't want to say names. It was enough to wake us though. We all ended up leaving. When we were almost to the main road, me and the girl who was there saw a similar looking creature run across the field on 2 legs, back into the forest at a blinding speed. Not a minute later, and we heard an animal scream. The noise didn't sound right, almost like it was ran through a distortion program that was naturally created. What can I do for protection? My best friend whom I moved in with has told me that he's had multiple instances of hearing a creature that's made the same noise. He called it nerve-wracking, like a distorted bird call, maybe a high-pitched distorted bark, but it's always the same noise. He knew it was watching him from 8 yards away. He couldn't see it ever. The only reason I know he isn't lying is because he heard it tonight. My girlfriend heard it too. Whatever it is, it either hunts in packs or can travel fast and silent because we heard the same noise from multiple angles. An update for you. My stepmom has even heard it. My best friend's little brother has heard it, and he's 15. My little brother's best friend has heard it. We live on top of a cave, and I didn't think to mention until now. The entrance has, from what I've heard, never been found. I saw it again last night. I was kissing my girlfriend goodnight and goodbye. I heard this sound right behind me. It sounded just like a body hitting the ground. I immediately got hairs that stood up on my back. I told her to go, that the faster the better. When I turned a shoulder, I sat for maybe half a second, though the realization hit me hard. Its skin seemed to reflect on the light, while its eyes absorbed almost all of it. Anyway, this is the last update. After my girlfriend and I did some research, we came across a few articles. Fox-like spirits that are the embodiment of intelligence. They can be anywhere from malevolent to benevolent. Originally, I felt scared, almost like I was being hunted. One of my other friends is a Wiccan. I know creatures like this demand respect. She recommended I left out milk as a sign of peace. Talking to the creatures directly rather than following a traditional ritual. Anyhow, I have no idea if this is a real thing, or if this is the fox creature that I'm running into, or if this is actually a skinwalker. Any advice is welcome, because I have no idea what I'm dealing with here. All I know is that this feels like pure evil. This story recollects what happened during the Navajo Nation fair season of 2015. My roommate and her boyfriend decided to head back to the res to take part in the festivities, rodeo, parade, and carnival. My roommate was the offspring of divorced parents and spent her teenage years half on the res in Window Rock, Arizona, with her mother and half with her father in Phoenix. She was raised a devout Catholic, even attending Catholic school. Nothing paranormal had ever occurred in her lifetime, up until this point. Her boyfriend was an urban Navajo who was a Christian, having been born and raised off the res in Phoenix, Arizona. I am declaring their religious ideologies and affiliations because neither of them believed in Navajo traditionalism or ghost stories. Late one evening, after both of them got off work, they decided to head out to make most of the 3-day fair weekend. My roommate had made prior accommodations with a good friend from high school. When my roommate was a young adult, her mother decided to move away from the res. If her mother still lived in Window Rock, she would have simply stayed there. The accommodations were as follows. Her good friend opted to stay at a close relative's and offered her 2-bedroom, 2-bath manufactured home, all at their disposal. The trailer was located off the road between St. Michael's and the first 4-way intersection. The first intersection past KTNN when you are headed south towards Window Rock from Summit. Many have called it the back road to St. Michael's. The old original township of St. Michael's, that is. As you can imagine, they arrived to their Navajo Fair B&B pretty late. The trailer was off to the right of the main highway and was situated at the foot of a large rolling hill. There was no streetlight. First order of business. My roommate calls her friends to let her know that they arrived safely. They walk up to the trailer and unlock the door and give themselves a tour of their accommodations. They turned on all lights in every room as they toured. My roommate had driven the entirety of the journey home, so she was a bit more fatigued than her partner. She asked him to go get the luggage from the car. They were driving a hatchback. The car was parked about 40 feet away. She explained to me that it had rained some weeks before, and the dirt road leading up to the house was wrecked. To avoid bottoming out, she parked on level ground. She walks into the guest room, and her boyfriend is already laid out on the bed. She pleads with him to go get the luggage, and most importantly, her makeup bag. So, that way she can remove her makeup before bed, and doesn't have to sleep with it on. She compromises with him that she'll go out with him if he does the heavy lifting. She doesn't want to put her heels back on, so she decides to watch him from the porch. Yes, heels. She worked at a bank and had always dressed professionally in a pantsuit and heels. So, she is standing on the top stairs of the small 3-stair porch with the front door slightly ajar, her hand on the doorknob. Her boyfriend walks off into the pitch black. The light from his phone serves as the only beacon of light signaling his location. As she watches his light grow dimmer and smaller in the distance, she hears what seems to be a pack of dogs howling and barking. She said it sounded like a rumble, a pack of feral reservation dogs or coyotes fighting. The pack of dogs comes barreling down the large hill just behind the trailer. She hears a loud thud against the back wall of the trailer. The thud was so loud, she heard the rattling of the picture frames that were hanging. At this point, fear begins to creep into her mind. She calls out for her boyfriend, but hears no response. She shouts for him once again. That's when she realizes the dogs have all gone silent. All at once, in a fluid succession of motions, she said that something from inside the trailer slammed the front door, so fast that it created a gust of wind. She said that if she hadn't been holding onto the doorknob, it would have knocked her off the landing of the front steps. The front porch light flickered and goes dead. She is standing there, barefoot in the darkness. She tried to open the door and retreat back into the trailer. She was able to turn the doorknob until it clicked. The door wasn't locked. Something heavy was pressed up against the flimsy, manufactured, hollow core door from the inside. At this point, she said she didn't realize that she was crying and at the brink of an anxiety attack. Adrenaline took over, and she began throwing herself and all of her weight against the door. She said that once she saw it inch open, and the light from inside flooded the doorway for a split second before it slammed shut in retaliation. Fight or flight? She decides to run barefoot into the darkness to find her boyfriend. This is his account. He leaves his girlfriend at the top of the front door steps as he walks off into the dark, with only his phone serving as a flashlight. He is being very careful where he steps because the earth is turned and twisted and gnarled. Deep ruts and grooves form a vehicle driving in the mud before it hardens into a crust. He is afraid he might twist his ankle. He too hears the frenzied howls and barks of the dogs. He turns around to look at where the sounds are coming from. In the distance, he sees the faint light of the porch light go off. He rationalizes to himself that the dog's barking frightened his girlfriend, and in fear, she ran inside and unintentionally turned the porch light off. So, he continues walking in the direction of the car. He hears the thud of heavy footsteps behind him, mimicking his own stride. Not exactly in tune with his, following a split second after his own thud, almost echoing his own intentionally. Figuring it might be his frightened girlfriend running out to find him, he calls out to her, but to no avail. He sees a dim flicker in the distance, the light from his phone bouncing off the reflections of the taillights of the car. His body floods with relief. The relief, though, quickly drains to despair. His phone erratically dies. His heartbeat almost beats out of his chest. How could this be? He wasn't on his phone the entire time. It was fully charged. He takes a few urgent paces toward where the car was before the lights turned off. His palms are sweaty, and he swears he could feel his heartbeat pounding in his hands. Desperately, he reaches into his pockets for the car keys. He begins frantically pressing all the buttons, the lock, the unlock, panic, and open hatchback buttons. Nothing. He even stretches out his hand in the dark as he presses the buttons, thinking he is on the cusp of the electronic radius of the vehicle to respond. Still, nothing. The footsteps behind him hastened, and they almost sound like he is going to be charged from the back. He is too terrified to look back, and at this point, he realizes the dread he feels in the pit of his stomach. It means something is about to happen. Something unnatural. His shoulders drop, as if he instinctively braces for some sort of impact. The sound of the heavy footsteps would indicate that he should have been hit by now. Nothing. The footsteps loudly lead directly up to him, to his heels, and nothing. He opens his eyes. He hears something like a coin drop and hit the top of the car. He turns around to the patter of bare feet on the dirt road. His girlfriend charges into a full embrace, hugging him and burying her face into his chest. Mind you, his feet stay planted. He doesn't take one step forward or back. The car keys are still in his hand. His thumb presses down, a loud click, and the familiar sound of the hatchback automatically opening, and the light from inside the car quickly floods their immediate surroundings. They grab their luggage and the pair of flip-flops from the car and slowly make their way back to the trailer. Oddly, the front porch light is now on. My roommate makes her boyfriend go inside and check all the rooms before she goes back in. He opens the door with ease. He checks each room meticulously. There's no one inside. All the windows still locked from the inside. I have never retold this account to anybody, but I thought I would finally share before the time and life erases all details from my memory. Once in the safety of the trailer, her boyfriend pulled out the cell phone and it turned on to the same battery percentage. They corroborate their experience to recount what happened to each other. Both of them are dumbfounded at the fact that both of them were shouting at the top of their lungs for the other, one at a time, but neither of them said or heard the others yelling. Growing up on the res, you hear a fair share of Skinwalker and ghost stories, but this was the first time I ever heard one where the perpetrator manipulated electronics to great extent, or even at all. It was also the first case where the perpetrator manipulated sound waves. Both of them swore that they were easily in earshot of each other, but weren't allowed to hear the other's cries. There were no structures or trees between them, obstructing any sound waves. He had heard the pack of dogs, but wasn't allowed to hear her screaming out for him. What also spurred me to share this was the massive amount of questioning. If they exist, why haven't they been filmed or caught on camera? Skinwalkers are just as modern as you and me. Wicked as much as they may be, they are not stupid and deal with smartphones and technological advances as much as anybody. They walk the world as normal people during the day.